You're
That's
live.
why I said you should go first.
We're live. You're live now.
All right.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's the funny thing about being all the way almost towards the end is that you have the benefit of hearing what everyone else has said and contributed thus far. I want to do my shout outs up front. I just want to say to everyone here from the motherland that I'm grateful and thankful to be in this room with so many different folks from so many different parts of the motherland. And it's a dream come true for many Black people within the United States to return home and be welcomed in that way. So up front, I just want to give thanks on that note and wish everyone well in what we do and what we accomplish in this room, and hopefully all of the friends that we have made. So I guess since I'm sitting here, I'll go first and just do it how it do. My name is Shannon Jones. I'll tell you a little bit about who I am. I am raised in the city of New York, born and raised in Brooklyn. Lived in the Bronx, New York for 15 years. And I'm formally educated. I have a master's degree from CUNY Brooklyn College, but higher than that, I am informally educated on activism, mass mobilization, and street organizing, which actually takes precedence over any formal education that I have or ever had. So that's a little bit about me. How do I get here? How did we get to this room? Obviously, Matt put it together, but I get to this room because in 2014, Eric Garner was murdered by NYPD, July 17th of 2014. Myself and 7 other folks started an organization because we felt that what happened in Staten Island would not happen in the Bronx. Police brutality, that is, and the murdering of our Black people. We didn't know what we were doing, nor knew what we were gonna do, but we knew in that moment that we had to agitate. And in the context of everything that we've been learning thus far and hearing from the beautiful presenters and their research and their work around peace and nonviolence, there will be points of agitation. When there is a powder keg of injustice, there will be agitation and confrontation, right? We heard from Brother Jihad about agitation and direct confrontation. So that is part of the peace process. It's not an either or. It's part of the cycle of achieving justice for Black people within the diaspora. I look at it as Pan-Africans, not just your country, your tribe, your region of the world. But it is very important that we tune in that we all must achieve justice across those lines. So what I'm going to do is I like a little bit more interaction, and as part of practicing Ubuntu, right? Everyone so far has gotten up here and said what they had to say, and then we have the question and answer portion and this and that. But what we didn't do in the room, which is very key to peace building, right, and reconciliation and restoring relationships, no one asked the room what you wanted from us, right? So I'm going to take a few seconds just to do that. It'll be a little bit undemocratic because of the interest of time, but we're going to set it off. If you want to raise your hand and tell us what would make this panel, this plenary that's happening right now, work well for you, raise your hand, say something, or shout it out. It's fine.
Strengthen that network.
Strengthen a network. Anybody else?
Sharing experiences.
Sharing experiences.
Interacting with participants.
Interacting with the participants. Anything else?
New ideas.
Hearing new ideas. Shout it out. That's Esther. Hi.
Reconnecting with long lost brothers and sisters.
Reconnecting with long lost brothers and sisters. So as people on the panel, we have homework to do. We have to make sure that we respond to the people participating as well as just saying what we have to say. That is community building, that's peace building, because it's not just you hearing me in this moment, it's me hearing you. So I told you a little bit about myself, so you're getting to hear things. Hopefully you'll get some new ideas when everyone else shares their experiences in the critical work that they're doing in their region of the United States, right? You need 5 United States to make one Africa, but the United States is very, very huge. It has a ton of blends and nuances and experiences and how we relate to colonialism. So the things that you may hear from me as someone from New York City, the Northeast, that's gritty and grimy, may be somewhat different from what folks from Atlanta or Mississippi have to say, the different states, right? So I just wanted to offer that as a context as to why this grouping is relevantly broad. So also another thing I like to do is keep people busy, because there ain't no sleeping in here, not while I'm up here. That ain't gonna happen, okay? So as I begin to talk about a little bit, and who's the timekeeper over here? Who's timekeeper?
Yeah,
Good question.
Jacinta is in the back keeping time, so I got you. I got you. Okay, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna pass some things around the room. You can take a look at them as you hear us speak about our unique experiences. But these are some posters of some street actions that we've done over the years related to street agitation and some community education. So you can take one, pass it around. I made several copies of them so you can get a look at what they are and what they're about. And this is what we call in the United States a zine, right? I know this is an academic room where people get funding to get papers published and stuff. Nah, the raw, gritty grassroots does not have the resources to do that. So what we do is we publish zines. They're quick and dirty pieces of education and information that we use to either propagandize our issues, educate the community, and also base build. So I'll send this around. This is our FTP3 operations manual, where we set the tone on how street agitation, mass mobilization work. So I'll send that around this way and you can peruse it. So what I'll talk about is a point in time. 2014 to 2020. Everybody knows who Eric Garner is, right? Everybody knows who George Floyd is. I've seen these murals all over the world and all over Africa. Long story short, there was a powder keg, which still continues to be the case, of police operations, occupational terrorism in the Black community, with harassment, murders, ticketing, everything that you can imagine. Very, very intense and negative interactions with the police, and resulted in fever pitch murder of our people within a very concentrated period of time. So through my organization and collaborating with others, we did the following. We did, like I said multiple times, very intense confrontation with the police through mass mobilization, bringing attention to those that were murdered by the police before social media happened, right? When Eric Garner was murdered, when Akai Gurley was murdered, when Mike Brown was murdered, when George Floyd was murdered, everybody saw it worldwide. But there are hundreds and thousands of people that were murdered by the police before social media existed. So we did that work to also highlight those and raise the names, right? This is the spirit of Ubuntu. That is the spirit, because I am, because we are. We are able to do this because other people sacrificed their time, their resources, their lives, and their livelihood for what we're doing today. So through that work, we were able to also get involved in stopping police surveillance. And I'm going to pause right there, because in many of the presentations around peace building, reconciliation, and working together, the benefit of having folks from the United States in the room is that we can give you advance notice on how colonialism will operate as motherland Africans build independence. They don't want you to have it. Advance notice. They don't want you to have it. They may fund, right? What did Dr. Shivji say? They'll pay your rent, but won't buy you a building, because that's too much autonomy. So as you develop and do your research around these issues of bringing about peace, understand that conflict will continue to arise, contradictions will continue to arise, and it's very important to practice Ubuntu through principles of unity that will govern how you deal with conflict on the community level, which is very, very important. What I'm going to do is stop right there because I know you've gotten a lot of background. There's a lot of stuff floating around the room. After you've looked at it, please pass it around because they're all different. And what I'll do is if you have questions about it, if we do have time, I will answer the questions about what you've seen and as well as offline, right? Because we still have a day and a half with each other, right? So I'm going to pass the mic along here. Thank you so much. And I'll have a seat. Thank you guys so much.
So my name is Edget Betrus. I work with an organization called Community Movement Builders. And one thing that I noticed throughout the presentations yesterday was that we actually do have a lot of similarities. During the time where liberation movements were strong on the continent, we had liberation movements that were strong in the empire. And in which, or the United States or Turtle Island. And after the, here there was some success with independence, but then very quickly turned into neo-colonialism there. I don't even know, I would call it success. We had, integration, desegregation, programs. So for some people, I guess that was some level of success, but very quickly, just like here, we had there was the proliferation of NGOs, which were used to kind of divert that resistance energy into other things. Similarly, we had the creation of nonprofits, the nonprofit industrial complex, as we often call it, which is where, here's a little bit of money, you go figure out how to fix the problems in your community. Meanwhile, we still have occupying armies in the form of the police, still killing our people, still making sure that we basically live in segregated communities, and so forth. And basically that our children grow up under, with that experience of being occupied and believing they're inferior and having limitations on their lives. So we of our generation have tried our best to keep alive as much as possible the practices, the politics of the liberation movements that we learned from. And we're trying to rebuild that movement today. And so for my organization, Community Movement Builders, the way that we do that is through 4 areas. One, we do political education so that people understand that, yes, you may have an Obama, but how much did that do for us collectively? And yes, there are, you may have access to capital, but that does not make you a capitalist. And that would not solve any of our problems anyways, because that's actually what is killing us in many ways. So we engage in a lot of political education of all different kinds. We have sustainability programs such as worker cooperatives. We have community gardens where we encourage people to learn how to grow their own food. We have youth programs, etc. So we also do the other main area of work is mutual aid. So, these traditions of whether it is collective saving programs, we don't do one currently, but we do share basic groceries and just supplies, where people donate toothpaste and toothbrushes and all kinds of items, personal care items, as well as groceries. And then we come together, we do political education, and then distribute them amongst people who need it in the community. And the people who in the community who need them also come and volunteer in the distribution, and they participate in the political education. That's another program. The last area of work that we do is organizing on issues that are most directly impacting the community and neighborhoods that we work in. Though that has been things like gentrification, where basically are the little bit of neighborhoods that we have, we're being forced out of by developers coming in and negotiating deals with our local officials, who oftentimes look like us and came out of these neighborhoods, but now have had, an opportunity to move a little bit to a middle class status, and they want to maintain that class status, and they want to maintain their positions in government. And so they're helping these developers push people out of their homes. People get old, they're not able to keep up with the taxes, or they're not able to maintain their properties. And so they're pushed out, and then the developers buy up the land and they build up fancy, condominiums that people can't afford to live in. And so, we are being pushed out of those neighborhoods. So we do organizing to challenge the local officials. We've actually been even successful in getting rid of our local city council person. And we also help support people in staying in their homes by paying their taxes if they need. But mostly we do organizing so that people understand that if they don't speak up and fight for the right to stay in their neighborhoods by going to the city council meetings and speaking up for the policies that they do want, nothing's going to change for them. So we also have been working on the issue of the militarization of the police forces who are being trained by the Israeli Defense Force, basically to implement the types of urban warfare that they've been implementing in Gaza, Rafah, throughout Palestine, in cities across the United States where primarily Black and Brown communities exist. So that's some of the work that we do, and we definitely work with allies. Some of what's been really successful, for example, in the organizing to stop the building of Cop City, is not limiting our movements in terms of how people choose to engage in resistance and struggle. So if I am if my belief of nonviolence says I engage and struggle a particular way, that's fine. I can do that in that struggle, but I don't have to speak against or point out or be in conflict with someone who may choose to do that work differently than I do. And so that has allowed us to form really broad movements, and where people can bring in their different perspectives, different resources, different skill sets. And it's really made us a lot stronger, and it's really made it able to spread throughout the world. So that's something that I feel like, could be beneficial, everywhere, obviously, especially in this context where we've been discussing a lot about the use of violence or violent resistance versus active peaceful resistance, which are all tactics that we have engaged in and probably will in the future as well. I'll stop there and let you go. Thank you.
I guess I'll step up. So no, I'm gonna stay seated. So my name is Sacajawea Hall. My nickname that most people call me is Saki. I am a native New Yorker as well, and through my previous political organization, the Malcolm X grassroots movement, I slowly migrated to the Deep South. And so I was in Atlanta for a while, and then moved to Jackson, Mississippi, where I'm a co-founder of Cooperation Jackson. And so, Kali is going to talk about an important formula that we could say we developed. And I'm going to just share really briefly like what Cooperation Jackson is for people here who may not know of our organization. And so we come out of a Black radical tradition and the Black liberation movement. And I think one of the important things that we are trying to do, which is directly connected with here in the continent, is acknowledge and reclaim and affirm the different collective cooperative practices that our folks brought over and maintained as a part of basic survival, right? And so even after folks were no longer enslaved, in order for our communities to survive and in a lot of cases thrive, the type of work that we're doing and that we're trying to uplift and develop again, and also recognizing that like it never went away completely, right? But is the different principles that we're talking about, that we've been talking about for the last couple of days, right? And so Cooperation Jackson is working to develop a solidarity economy in Jackson, Mississippi, as a starting point. And we see that work being anchored by cooperative development, cooperatives, and specifically worker cooperatives. And so we have, up until now, we've had different ebbs and flows, and we have about 5, maybe working on 6 different cooperatives that are in development at different stages. We also have a community land trust. And within our community land trust, we have over 40 pieces of property. Most of the property is vacant. We do have some residential housing and we have commercial property. And the community land trust is a very specific legal framework in the United States, which most groups in the United States use it as a way to create permanently affordable housing. And for us, we're very explicit in our aim to decommodify land and housing and to take the land and housing off of the speculative market in our area. And so, so we see ourselves as a vehicle. We just celebrated our 10th anniversary on May Day, this past May 1st. And so we see ourselves as a vehicle for sustainable community development, economic democracy, and really a community collective process of stewarding our resources, including our labor. What else? Is there anything else?
What else you want to say?
Yeah. And so, so along the way, there's been a lot of need to create an attempt, an experiment in different things that we see as a part of this larger, what I like to describe as a ecosystem and a web of institutions, because the different parts of our lives, like we're not only talking about the economics, right? Like we're talking about all these different parts of our lives that are connected. And so we've done a wide range of things, including starting human rights, people's assembly process and coalition. And we have been able to uplift and talk about community production. We really see and want to talk about not only having like cooperative run businesses, but having ownership over the means of production. And so I guess I'll stop there and pass it to Kali to talk about Build and Fight, and then also talk about one of our most recent initiatives, which is creating a network, a People's Network for Land and Liberation with other community groups, organizations in other parts of the United States, so that we can even further build out this model and then be connected. And one of the things that I'm hoping, because of being able to, in the last several years, both here and in Ghana, is that we can have conversations where we're talking about how we're concretely connecting, and not only necessarily talking about solidarity, but talking about how we connect connect our cooperatives and connect economically, so that we're figuring out how do we export, how do we import, how do we, support. One example that's happening currently is a collective, a cooperative, consortium, not a cooperative right now, of coconut growers. And so how do we work with them to have a market in the United States, which is, low-hanging fruit for us, to sell coconut oil? And how do we leverage the resources that we have to help build their capacity to grow more? And to not only just grow more, but to control the whole refinement additive process. Right. So that they don't have to, anyway, I'm speaking. Right. So that they don't have to rely on. Put the means of production in their hands. Right. Yeah. And how do we strengthen our communities by doing those things, right? And I think that provides a level of, that can provide a level of safety, security. If safety and security leads to peace, then I guess I would say peace as well. I'm really challenged, and you all are helping push me in embodying this peace, this peace conversation, and
right.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing for, from the United States POV, where I think Dr. Shivji spoke about that yesterday. The way we confront, or the way we are confronted by colonialism as Black Americans in the United States, or so-called Black Americans in the United States, is very, very distinct and in your face. So our responses to that colonialism have to be even more distinct and more in your face. So usually conversations around what peace means to us don't necessarily manifest in the way that we've seen here in the past day and a half. Because to us, peace means allowing the colonizer to do whatever he wants to do, and we turn the other cheek. Because a lot of times those concepts are embedded in extreme fundamental Christianity that have been the source of a lot of our oppression. So I'm making an assumption here around where that challenge is coming from. What's giving you a little heartburn? Like what they talk about, all this peace, what the hell?
We're still under active occupation.
Right. So we're not liberated. Black people in the United States, although we have access to a lot of the crumbs of white supremacy, right? We have a lot of access to that. We are still colonized in our current state. We do not have our land resource. We do not control any natural resource. We do not have our own government. We do not have any of that, right? When all of these so-called laws were passed that allow us to vote, allow us to become doctors, nurses, lawyers, those were not put as a question to African people. Those are on the terms of the colonizer, right? That word came up, was it yesterday? Plebiscite? What happened to African people was not put on plebiscite to African people, right? Who's to say I wanted to be an American citizen? Anybody asked me that, right? So we are still colonized in that way. So when we hear concepts of peace, it's like little squinting going on. However, hearing more about what that means in this context for countries that have won independence and what's necessary to stop internal conflict and those as a necessity are very eye-opening for us. As a parallel though, check this out, y'all. The conflict resolutions, right? Who was it? John, I don't know John in here. The conflict resolutions, the alternative dispute resolutions, the chiefdoms, the chiefs, all of this are the colonial versions of the cure violence models that are triangulating in the United States.
Same funded, same people.
Correct. So it's in that context for us where can peace building on a community level look totally differently than some of the so-called peace models that have been set up and funded by our colonizers, right? We don't even have our own, right? Brother Jihad took up armed struggle against the colonizer. Fast forward to 2024, the colonizer wants to do gun buyback. So our people don't even have the armament should we necessitate taking up against the state in that way. That's why peace reads to us in a certain way of compliance. So having these discussions are exploratory for us in a lot of ways, but then how can we use that to develop community where we will be cooperating in Jackson, right? That's what peace means to us, because if we're fighting, I ain't planting nothing with you. I don't trust you. We're not gonna do it, right? Or I'll align with the colonizer. And I heard Saki use the word network, and I will pass the Kali in 92 seconds. Along with what we're doing here, because that's the purpose. Brother Jihad said it. I ain't come all the way from Brooklyn to go to an academic conference. I do that at home. We got that Jacob Javits. It could be 10,000 people I could play with for hours and hours and hours, and PhD fellows and things of that nature. Our mission also is to build those networks. Something better had happened when we leave here tomorrow. I personally am holding all of you accountable to that. The reason why I pass those things around in hard copy paper, and you all will get my personal cards, is because I have the expectation that we will all be committed to employing these principles and the findings of all of this research and all of the connections that we have made thus far over the past day and a half into something salient and tangible that speaks to the Pan-Africanism that we want to see. It can't be a hollow concept or imaginary concept, and it has to connect all of our experiences. Now, one way we do that in the United States, we've talked about this a lot, just in this setup we have here around that networking. So in addition to all of that hardcore agitation work that has happened, we understand the necessity for a network. So there was a tribunal in 2021 around 5 counts of genocide. I'll just skip to the verdict. The tribunal charged the United States with genocide for its mass incarceration, poor health care, treatment of Black political prisoners and POWs, and other forms of economic discrimination and ethnic cleansing through gentrification and other things that we've heard here. So what we're trying to do across the United States and now being here worldwide is also build that network, right? Moses talked about it with Pen, the network of networks. There is a need and a basis for us to be in a network so we're able to respond on one accord, not according to necessarily nations, states, or tribes, but as Africans, as the diaspora. So when Rudolph says Cameroon is turned up, we understand what that means, and we are willing and able to respond in our own respective corners of the world, right? We have to be able to do that. If there is a mission to build coconut oil refinement that benefits African people, how can that be duplicated or replicated in your corner of the world? So then we are speaking in lockstep in principle, right? We're talking about these principles in order to resolve conflict, but what are they? What are those African principles specifically that we deal with? Are those we build autonomy economically, we build autonomy socially? Those are question marks. Those are not what I'm projecting. But how do we do that in one accord? So Kenyans are moving in one accord with someone from Jamaica, with someone from Mississippi, with someone from Atlanta, with someone from South Sudan, and those groups and organizations that pull together on one accord. So there is also some leafleting going around the room around People's Senate. So here's my ask. Yeah, I let the room get quiet on purpose. Here's my ask, is that when you get that leaflet, I don't know whether it'll be a full-size sheet or quarter-size sheet, there's an email on the back. I want y'all to email it with your information. I implore you to do so. This is how we build a pen, the network of networks, how we get on one accord. I also expect my contact just to be ringing off like an alarm, right? Or else this was just another conference with some great cookies and Tanzanian food, right? So Kali, over to you. Thank you.
Well, no, one last thing that I wanted to say was that, like, we are clear that we are in a settler colonial empire, and that the work that we're doing is to dismantle that empire. And while we've been fighting for so long, our work in Cooperation Jackson is really focused more on, I would say more so on the building and the building the alternative, and reestablishing our relationship to each other and to Mother Earth. And so I do think, and I'm glad that you used the word, I can't remember the word that you used, but you used the word that struck a chord with me in terms of compliance. Yeah. Like the peace part, meaning compliance, I think is one of the reasons why there's kind of this like knee-jerk reaction. But I appreciate and I recognize that in order for our communities to recuperate from the trauma and the exploitation and the repression, especially to work with each other, is for that peace building process internally to happen, right? And that has to happen in order for us to then be able to have, you know, whole relationships with other people, with other communities. And so so we're very explicitly anti-capitalist, and we're trying to create systems and ways that our community, and I don't like to use the word alternative that much anymore, but it is alternative to the extractive, repressive, oppressive, economic, political system that we live under. And so that build and fight part and the balance of the build and fight part, I think is important, but like we have to be building. On that note, build and fight.
We don't have enough time to do that. So I'm not even gonna even try to go there. We got, how much time we got?
Take the time, you need. Take some time. Seriously.
So what I want to open up is something different. We don't have time for that, just to deal with some other stuff. First, I want to bring in Babu and his works into this conference and conversation, whether folks agree with his analysis or not. I do think a large part of what we has been discussed here requires, I think, a rereading of some of his works, particularly the book he did on, was it African Socialism or Socialist Africa? And those fundamental questions and disagreements about what the programmatic outlook of how those of us who were striving for national liberation and independence, what were some of the fundamental questions around this development piece that we didn't have answers to 50 years ago, and quite frankly, we don't have answers to now. The other piece I want person I want to bring into the room is Amilcar Cabral, and particularly his analysis about how our processes of development were interrupted by imperialism. And that the question has been raised in a couple of different forums here about, is there anything from the West that we should learn or keep and incorporate? I think that's the wrong question. The fact that we all here speaking English, for the most part, already incorporates the fact that we are part of a world process that they have imposed upon us, whether we like it or not. And I think it's more of a question, how do we recover the different aspects invoking Cabral? How do we recover those aspects of our history, our culture, and our identity, and our organizing methods and rationality to build the new types of systems that can transgress all the different aspects and dimensions of the capitalist system, which European colonialism ushered into the world? That's a different set of questions than whether we should adopt, because I'm going to invoke Cabral also on this point. Anything and anywhere that any human has ever created should be something that we should all be able to access, right? Knowledge is knowledge. Now, how we apply it in our context and for what purposes, that's the fundamental challenge. But I do want to, what made me think about that is, I want to invoke this particular debate. I forget the brother's name back in the back, but it's also a fundamental question I find at the root of a lot of what's going on here relative to the whole piece of the conversation about how do we construct peace coming out of the domination of European colonialism and imperialism. And this notion that there can be no peace without development, I want to push back on that. Because fundamentally, I would argue, at least by the standard definition of development that most of us have been employing, there basically can be no development without conflict. Because what that fundamentally entails is somebody is going to be exploited. Somebody is going to have their resources extracted. And that is not going to be done in a democratic manner. Don't lie to yourself. It's not. Right? And so if we want to keep adopting a certain notion and articulation of development as something, quite frankly, which emulates the West, we're going to have to go through the same historical processes by which the West got what they got. And first and foremost, we got to remember the West perfected their brutality on themselves before they brought it to the rest of the world. And is that something we want to emulate? I don't want no parts of that at the end of the day, right? And so we have to think of, in the spirit of Lajama and Ubuntu, what are the different ways in which we can develop, and we need to redefine what that development means. If the development means all of us is going to have, SUVs and TVs and each screen, we're going to need 5 planets for that. Mm-hmm. And I don't see none of y'all going to Mars real quick, right? And those who planning on going to Mars, they ain't taking you with them. Mm-hmm. They ain't got no plans for you to go nowhere other than be here, right? And continue to be some workforce for them. So I think there's a different way in which we're going to have to really approach a lot of these questions, which draw deeper on our own history than I think sometimes we want to. And that history, unfortunately, in many cases was interrupted. I don't care, which tribe, which nation, which group you are, all of our history is being interrupted. I will offer that I think New African people offer a particular perspective on this, given how we've been, taken across the shore and then had to reconstruct a culture, often from fragments and pieces, and to find our humanity when it was totally denied us, right? And then construct that and then create a narrative in that construction, which talk about peace, I'll bring in Martin Luther King, and not that I agree with King on everything, right? But I do agree with the piece that the beauty, I think, of New African culture is that you can treat me like a dog, but I still understand my humanity and I understand yours. Right? And I'm gonna hold up a mirror to you, meaning white folks in particular, I'm gonna hold up a mirror to you of what you are missing. Right? And reflect that back to you in so many fundamental ways. And that's in report to some of what you were saying, Stellan. I think some of these deeper questions that's gonna have to be invoked. And the last piece, you know, the one thing I haven't really, I've heard it implicitly, but not explicitly, but I just want to bring it in the room is that I'm concerned, comrades, about that. There's kind of maybe a lack of urgency in the conversation. And as the father of two, relatively young kids, I've struggled with what the hell did I bring them in the world for when I see that we are living in the middle of the sixth extinction, which is doing nothing but rapiding and increasing. And it's the sad fact that, the dinosaurs didn't quite understand what was coming for them. We clearly know what's going to happen to us if we keep going down this particular path of, capitalist development, right? It's going to mean mass extinction of a large part of humanity, if not humanity, and most complex life on this planet. And we don't have much time to address that. So there needs to be a particular urgency that we all need to get down with that's beyond just national liberation or national development. Like we have some real work we got to do that's going to require us figuring out how to live in an entirely different way, which is why in part I push back on some of this notion of development, because I do fundamentally think to a certain extent, it's not an accident that most of the climate justice movement, if you want to call it that, is being led by indigenous people in this day and age. And I think what they're invoking is we have survived on this planet as a species in our current form as Homo sapiens sapiens for about 400,000 years. And for about 390,000 of those years, we were doing pretty well, right? And it's only been within this last 10,000 years where this class divided societies have emerged. So what about this particular path that we're pursuing has now got us to the point that just within the last 200 years alone, we've gotten onto this utterly destructive path. So for me, I'm like, I don't want to hear nothing about your development if your development means the extinction of life on Earth. That's not development. That's madness. So, I'm like, Europeans can't tell me shit about, what the world should be like or could be like when y'all have brought it to the brink of extinction. We need to have a deeper dive into like what the piece that I think Edgen was bringing up about all our traditions. They talk about how backwards they were. They kept us alive for hundreds of thousands of years. So obviously we was doing something right. There was some deep knowledge that our people had about how to feed, clothe, protect, and heal themselves, educate ourselves so that each generation could proceed afterwards. There's a lot more that I think we still are ashamed of that we need to figure out how to go back and deal with that's going to enable us to survive in the future when and if things collapse. And if they keep proceeding at the rate that they are, we are definitely feeling that we're going to face a collapse. And Elon Musk and then the rest of the bourgeois class that think that they're going to escape, they're going to be right here with us. They will have a little bit more guns, a little bit more resources to deal with, but they still dependent upon labor, which is fundamentally looks like people like me and you, right? And we need to use that as a repositioning around how power is going to be allocated on this planet real soon. So I will try to leave with you. There's what Saki was talking about. We've been tinkering with a formula that goes to what tries to get at what Professor Shi was getting at, like how in this current day and age where we don't have real strong left parties, we can't really rely on activist states or left governments because there's few and far in between, and those that are either seriously constrained or so full of contradictions that they're hard to deal with in so many fundamental ways. That don't mean we don't protect them, like Cuba and some other folks. I'm gonna still ride with them, but I got a lot of criticism of them too at the same time, out of love and respect, right, for what they're doing and what they're trying to accomplish. But we have to find the road wherein the social movement dimension has to take the lead around social emancipation. And what that formula piece, if folks could put it up, just highlight, it's a set of practices drawn from the Solidarity Economy. I emailed it, but I don't know if they can pull it up, but they can email it out to folks. It's just a set of practices which are trying to start with what are masses of people already doing, right? And masses of people, millions of people all over the world are engaged in mutual aid, for instance, in one form or another. Millions of people are engaged in farming, like the La Via Campesina, one of the largest, social justice movements in the world. The issue that we argue is we have enough people. We're not sufficiently organized or coordinated to have a major impact on how capital functions and how the imperialist states intervene in what we do. And there's a deeper level of unity by associating upon what people are doing and finding on different ways of how we can, do planning with each other that then creates an alternative path based on us being able to engage in mutual exchange, not just in mutual mutual aid. Because the problem with aid, just in short, the problem with aid is not dependent on our own productive capacity. Oftentimes we have to borrow something or buy something or have something donated. That means those who donate or those who give can cut that off at any period in time. But if it's directly related to our autonomous productive capacities of whatever scale, we enhance our ability to create alternatives. So I'm gonna end there so we can open it up for questions. So yeah, and this is something. Look, it's constantly in development, and this grows out of a particular experience that we have in Jackson. Saki talked a little bit just specifically about Cooperation Jackson, but Cooperation Jackson is really an instrument of the Jackson Kush Plan, which is a piece that we developed. And the Jackson Kush Plan was particularly why I wore this shirt, so y'all can understand a part of our movement, which is the New African Independence Movement, which is just one segment of the Black Liberation Movement. It's not its totality. Don't want to give people that wrong impression, but we come out of that particular movement, which is trying to do the unfinished work of dismantling the United States empire from within to create more room for everybody else to breathe. That's ultimately what it's going to take. And what this is trying to figure out, because we don't have parties, we don't have much of a left to really speak of in the United States. We got millions of people who are already doing these things, right? But like I said, we're not coordinated, we're not in dialogue. And part of it has to do with like the trust and all those other kind of things. We have to develop the practices and the habits to build that trust, right? And realize like I'm only gonna go as far, just bringing back to Ubuntu and the regime, I'm only going as far as we all go together, right? And in some way, somehow, we're gonna have to figure out how to work with each other, even if we don't like each other, right? Just out of the necessity, I need you and you need me. So let's figure this out. So that's the contribution. I'll stop there so we can get to questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Is there any, I see the first hand.
In the back.
I have one question and one request for you. I'll do the request first. The request would be, can you really explain to those who are not in the United States what's going on in Jackson, Mississippi right now, the real issue, and how that is connected to the civil rights and Black power struggle to this point, right? And then my question is, how is your program connected to the Black Belt thesis analysis that other groups have attempted through other organizations?
Yeah.
Thank you for the inspiring talks. So I'm a young person from South Africa. I'm seeking to organize in South Africa. What a lot of people don't know is that South Africa is still a conquered territory. Hence, even the name South Africa indicates towards our lived experience and our lived reality of conquest. So I do seek to make connections. You'll definitely be getting an email from me. Probably be the first people. But I think part of creating those relations also is engaging intellectually in terms of how we understand liberation, how we see the way forward, the ideology that drives the struggle and so on. And looking at, so I just took a quick look at this pamphlet here, and I'm seeing first the name here, Spirit of Mandela. And I don't know if Mandela can be associated with some of the ideas that you put forward, who is part of the people who in the 1994 transition in South Africa put peace over justice. Mr. Matt Mayer earlier spoke about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was chosen over a proposed position of the Truth and Justice Commission. So, or the Justice and Reconciliation Commission, you know. So these were some of the people who put peace at the expense of liberation, at the expense of the independence of African people in South Africa. And part of this, and which is also what I'm seeing here, part of your object is to champion and uphold the human rights of Black and brown people. So in South Africa, at least amongst Pan-Africanists, this concept of human rights is a very suspicious one, because that was what was used to conceal the fact of conquest, to perpetuate conquest, and get us into the post-1994 dispensation, where African people still live in dire situations and protected the interests of white people. So I want to understand, when you speak on upholding the human rights of Black people, is it the Westphalian conception of human rights, drawing from the fathers of human rights, Thomas Hobbes and John Locke, who understand society and human rights in such a way that, as a matter of necessity, encourages accumulation against other people, you know, and the concept of human rights is that you're protected, is to protect individuals against other individuals, which kills that social cohesion and that collaboration. I mean, Thomas Hobbes describes a society as a war of all against all, you know, and everyone is a werewolf against all other werewolves, and the necessity of human rights is to protect each individual as an atom against other individuals. So do you also use that conception of human rights, or do you think about it in a different way?
A quick announcement before I no, I'm not using it. People who are flying tomorrow or something, please go to the front desk, everybody, if you're flying, to check on your flight schedule so you don't miss your flights, please.
The transfer to the airplane.
After the sessions or?
After the session.
After the session, not now.
So my question is for you two. Are you gonna go up front? So I guess my question for all of you is if you could speak to a little bit about some of your strategies in bridging across like the US, as well as some of your localized challenges. So like I have family in Jackson. My grandmother has a house on the street in Jackson that's like inherited. That whole block is abandoned. She desperately wants that to be her last thing, right? For that house to be upkept, but of course is deeply saddened by the state of Jackson and the abandonment. So I'm curious about your community land trust and the vacancies and the ability to get Jackson folks on board. And I know y'all done a great deal of work to change the city council, and some of the repression as a result of that. So I'm curious if you could share that with others, but also so that I can learn a bit more about that as well. so that I can make connections. And then of course, like some of your community work, like you said, you were doing stuff in the world, curious all the different places you're working. And then, you know, just and also Shannon thinking through some of your strategies or some of the strategies through Bronx sites and other sort of networking and some of the challenges that you're facing. Because I think an important context about the urgency and the lack of urgency is also the great amount of repression that's been done as a result of the 2014, the 2010s, the 2000s organizing, right? That work to try to call attention to Black repression and degradation in the United States, right? As a resurgence, 2020 with George Floyd, the resulting repression today, and the role even of Black leaders, Black police chiefs, Black mayors, and the silencing and repression of Black radicalism in the US right now. Because I think also that we can learn from each other about that current context and how we can connect around pushing. So
That's it.
You got one behind you.
Thank you. My question will go. I was impressed that you are formally educated and formally educated. To me, that gives me the hope that you have experience and you can share something with me if you think it is okay. And if you think it's not okay, you just leave it. If you have not been to the US, but I have heard people talking about the Black people in the US. And the way that version of those people, they say the Black people are not civilized, they are harsh, they are thieves, they are that and that, and if you are not careful, they can easily kill you. And the best way is to avoid it. You as a experienced, educated, I want you to share your experience with me. Is that version correct? Can we rely on it? That they are this, they are that, they are this, they are that, in a very negative way. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, it was directed to me, so I guess I'll just jump right in. I'm part-time comedian, so the answer to your question is yes. We're harsh, but see, New York has. The United States is very, very big, right? And there are different versions of Blackness all across the country. So what you might have heard could be specific to a particular condition in the United States as colonized Black people, right? I personally have been told I'm very harsh.
Because you're from New York.
Exactly. Exactly. Not because I'm a Black American, but because I live in a hustling city with 18 million people. They've been saying 12 million since I was a kid. That's a lie. I think it's about 25 million people in New York City. But this is one of the themes that we heard all day, correct? Divide and conquer. Because when motherland Africans come to the United States, the last part of what you said will hold true within community. Stay away from them.
And it depends on your class.
Stay, but the assumption is that Black Americans are lower class until you find out otherwise, right? So stay away from them. So one of the main takeaways from being here is we are busting that wide open, right? Because if you let Black Americans tell it, Nigerians got a brick of cocaine and a money scam for you, right? This is all the nonsense that goes on because the purpose of it is to develop disdain, develop suspicion, develop ways to interrupt Ubuntu, that we will not work together on any level, which is the purpose of all of us being here. Congo, Zimbabwe, Cameroon, Brooklyn, Mississippi, Nairobi, Tanzania. Come on now. We are busting that wide open. That's why it is a critical key for us to remain united after we leave this space. Now, human rights. I'm going to answer that while I have the microphone, that human rights question, because it was based on the leaflet that's going around the room about Spirit of Mandela. So, and it also answers Dejanay's question in part about strategies. We have the privilege in this room, right? So I heard folks introduce themselves as PhD fellows, PhDs, have contributed to published books, written articles. We have the privilege of dissecting that kind of stuff. Are you talking about Locke and Hobbes? Or are you talking about Dr. Shivji? Who are you talking about? No. People that you will need to organize with don't give a damn about none of that. They understand in their context what human rights means to them. When you have organized masses and you have political education, this is where you can refine your concepts. When you organize in South Africa, you will ask people, what do you want? They may say human rights. Are you going to say, do you mean like Hobbes and Locke? They're going to be like, say what? Now you've elevated yourself to a place where they ain't trying to hear you, right? So a lot of times the literature needs to be in a place where that people can understand, right? Now you may underline it with this some shitty politics. And as we learn and grow and accomplish things, we will refine, right? Because African people, we are in constant state of renaming. Constant state of renaming, right? As the brother in the back want to explore what Ubuntu means across the diaspora. Even in the United States, Ubuntu is getting smelly. It's getting corrupted. It's getting co-opted. Give it another maybe 2-3 years. Black Americans may not even want to say it because it'll be associated with colonization, like Juneteenth, stuff like that. So that's the answer to that question, at least a piece of it, and the strategy part. One of the strategies that Bronxites for NYPD Accountability did was work with masses of people. You have to be able to work with masses of people. That includes people that may drink too much, may smoke too much, and smoke God knows what too much. People that when this particular thing that you're doing is over, I may come and help you plant, but after I help you plant, I'm sleeping outside, right? We have to be willing. When we say community, is that a community of PhD fellows? Or is that a community of all kinds of representations of African people? And we can't hold our nose up because like Stella will go do it. He'll go do it. Then we'll turn around as Black people like, oh, this white guy is all up in our business. Yeah, because he went and did it. And didn't make any qualms about engaging with people in a way that necessitates change. So that was one of our major strategies. I don't know where the poster is somewhere in the room with Stop the Raids. Who was being raided? Young Black men under age 30 that listen to music I no longer listen to, but maybe I have started a little bit. And that are stereotyped that you should stay away from. Right? We had to go into the public housing buildings, and I was raised in public housing, but I've raised my son in public housing, I should say. But we had to do that, right? Even this space that we're holding right now is a very protected, safe space. We're not being challenged by people that would straight up tell you, I don't care about all that book shit. What are you doing for me? Right? So that's part of that strategy. I'll pass it to answer the other portions of the questions that didn't get touched on.
Nobody really asked me a question.
Yeah, they did.
Which was about our strategy in terms of where we're located. Okay, so we have chapters in different cities, and I guess this speaks a little bit to the reality of new Africans in different parts of the continent. So we have a chapter in Detroit, chapter in Dallas, Atlanta, Los Angeles, and in New York. And there are differences, cultural, differences shaped by the particular histories. But ultimately, we all are facing the same conditions. So our strategy is really not that different. In those places, we still maintain the same programmatic areas, including the political education, mutual aid, community organizing, what am I forgetting? Cooperatives and sustainable sustainability. But I do think it matters. Like, you need to have people from the communities that are being organized doing the organizing, so that they could relate specifically to their particular experiences. And I do think that the terminology and philosophy of rights, individual rights and human rights that come from the Western concept that we are individuals, as opposed to the philosophies of Ubuntu, in which we are one, because when I look at you, I see me, and you see yourself in me. It does undermine our ability to implement things like Ujamaa and other ways of collaboration. But at the same time, I do think that our traditional or indigenous communities were not always good at protecting people who may have been abused or were not treated well for whatever reason. And so I don't think we can, until we are clear about what our ways of making sure that everybody's dignity is upheld, and that we really do see in every single person ourselves, regardless of what they may look like on the outside or inside or whatever. I don't think we can just throw out, the frameworks that we have currently adopted and have been using, even if they are coming from the colonizer perspective.
So,
in terms of human rights.
You guys have like 3 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to be real quick. The black belt thesis, I would encourage us to know what it is, and for those who don't know, that's a phrase that came out of the Communist Party of the USA, primarily, and the Communist International, to try to give definition to the struggle of black people in the United States, particularly those concentrated in the southwestern portion of the United States. It was something that was adopted to try to counter the Marcus Garvey movement and the black nationalist movement, and for them to appropriate our folks into their particular brand of the communist movement. So I always encourage people to know what it is, but that's not actually our historical framework.
Okay.
The historical framework is a nation within a nation that goes back to the AME 100-something years way before that. And other folks, Delaney, all those other folks who carried it through. So which brings to this brother's point about us using our own points of reference. Human rights has always been a contested piece. And I would encourage you to go look at and read some of W.E.B. Du Bois's writings around how he viewed both the inauguration of the UN as both a success and a failure, and how he felt that Eleanor Roosevelt in particular, who he schooled, educated, worked with, betrayed him, right? And betrayed a lot of the movement, which is why him, George Patterson, some of those other folks did the first We Charge Genocide, was in part a direct response and a challenge to how they narrowed the definition of human rights from what people had already articulated what it should be, right? And so that's always been in context. I agree with you. The notion that they have adopted within the initial UN framework is very problematic, but that's not the only way to define it. We got to do our own points of reference.
Let's explain Malcolm's.
I was trying to get there. Yeah. Malcolm and Robeson even before him, right? Yeah. So look, I consider one of my mentors, Jamu Barak, has been arguing for a people-centered human rights perspective, which is the one that we kind of adopt in a lot of fundamental ways. And he's one of the heads of an alliance called Black Alliance for Peace. So for folks to get to know them, that we are all a part of. In the last piece, I'm just going to keep it real with you about Jackson.
Yeah.
We won a popularity contest in 29 and in 2013. People always get confused at the fact that our movement was able to put a few people in office, that somehow we won power. We didn't win power. Don't have no illusion that our movement gained a tremendous amount of power in Jackson, right? We have some social influence, right? But we don't have no state power, nothing even close. And what little influence that we have, the governor in particular, this governor, Phil, what's his name? Not Brian. What's his, Tate Reeves. He is going after our movement in particular, and he is dismantling all of Jackson's basic fundamental autonomies, right? And then we are right now suffering on the fact that, unfortunately, the New African Independence movement in Jackson is fractured, and it's going to take some time, some work, some healing to put it back together again in some form or fashion. But right now, it's not as strong as it should be, and as a result, they are able to push back and kind of the empire striking back and reclaiming more territory that we should not be losing in the way that we are. That all our organizations, to a certain extent, are doing okay, but overall, in the overall grand scheme of things, the right is on the march and on the advance, and we are in the retreat. That's the reality.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do people know that you can't drink the water in Jackson?
Yeah, you can't. Yeah.
That's what I know. I want to
You can't.
You
You
gotta
can't
boil
drink
water.
the water. The road.
Yeah.
There's no roads that are not.
Really navigable.
So the conditions are very much similar to a lot of places on the continent. And
But don't we in the fight? That's the thing to understand. We in the fight. Ain't like it's no quit or
No, for sure.
like we made some moves. They done made some moves back. We got to regroup and strike again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's just, I think this is very profound, and we could have continued. Unfortunately, we have another panel that's coming, and we're eating into their time. Thank you very much for this. Thank you for the.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now I will hand over to Charles.
Can I keep this? You certainly made it. Ain't gonna let you do it with me.
Oh, that's an excellent one.
It's okay.
I know, but what's the happy panther?
I don't know that. It's either this or blank.
Okay.